It's the Good as Gould Show on ICLU Radio, your campus station. Joining us today to talk some boxing is Mark Ortega, who is a researcher for PBC on Fox and writes for the sport on Sporting News. So let's get things started, man. Mark, how you doing, man?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. And I just want to get started right away. We could talk about a huge fight coming up. Obviously, Garcia and Spence this Saturday, but we'll talk about that a little later. I want to get started first with the business side of the sport, which obviously it's been a huge week of business aspect related things. HBO obviously no longer in the business of boxing, and it's opened up a lot of fighters to DAZN, which is an upstart streaming service that's under the direction of former ESPN president John Skipper. And now DAZN got things started by signing Canelo to that record-breaking deal of over $300 million. So gone are the days of watching him on pay-per-view, and we'll actually instead see him on Cinco de Mayo weekend on that app in a unification title fight between Danny Jacobs and Canelo Alvarez. And then last week, DAZN showed just how serious they were in the sport of boxing by signing Triple G to a multi-fight deal. And now part of that deal includes the fact that Triple G's next fight is going to be in June. And now it leads me to believe, what is he going to be doing in June? Who's he going to fight? Do you have any indication on who he's going to fight in June when he makes his way back into the ring? I know you've been in talks with John Skipper. Tell me what you've been hearing.
There's nothing substantial yet on who Golovkin's next opponent's going to be, but by all accounts, he's likely to face a lesser opponent than the kind of guys he's faced. In his last four fights, he's fought Canelo twice and Danny Jacobs with one fight in between in his last four fights, and it's more likely he faces someone on the level of a Ron Martirosyan, who he fought last May, an easy knockout. I would expect him to face someone of that level, maybe someone with a padded record, a European fighter. There's really, no shortage of mid-level guys that Golovkin can get in there with to set up a matchup with the winner of Canelo and Jacobs for September. That's kind of where Golovkin's head is really at, is setting up that bigger fight towards the end of the year, and doubt they put him in any sort of real risk in his first fight as part of the six-fight deal with DAZN.
Okay, now, in today's boxing landscape, now with DAZN, I mean, you obviously got four major players. PBC, Top Rank, Matchroom, Golden Boy Promotions, and the politics of the sport seem to be at an all-time high with fighters that are seemingly attached to the hip of respective networks, as we mentioned with DAZN. Eddie Hearn's Matchroom guys are on there, and De La Hoya's Golden Boy Promotions guys are on there. DAZN's changing over the game. Then you got Bob Arum with Top Rank. Those fighters can be seen on ESPN and ESPN+. And then Al Heyman's PBC fighters showing up on Showtime and Fox. Now, it makes me ask, is what we're seeing with all of this healthy for the sport of boxing?
I don't think it's really that much different from what we've experienced over the last 20 years or so when the sport began to fracture. HBO, at one point stopped working with Al Heyman, which really was the beginning of their downfall. Al Heyman, the head of what is now the PBC, that really seemed to be the beginning of the downfall for HBO, was them not dealing with certain promoters. They eventually had a bad falling out with Bob Arum and Top Rank, and that really limited the pool of fighters that they're able to deal with. It's gotten to a point where it feels like certain promoters are only really targeting certain weight classes. Like you mentioned earlier, DAZN has kind of the foothold in the middleweight division. At welterweight, PBC really controls most of the key names, the only outlier being Terrence Crawford, who's promoted by Top Rank and will be fighting Amir Khan on ESPN pay-per-view next month. But, the heavyweight division is the one division where it's really fractured across all three of those networks. Deontay Wilder has fought on Showtime and Showtime pay-per-view in his last handful of fights. Tyson Fury, who fought Wilder to an exciting draw in December at the Staples Center, was on the verge of making a rematch with Wilder and then opted to sign with Top Rank for a big money long-term deal. And, of course, Anthony Joshua, who holds most of the belts at heavyweight, is over at DAZN and was the first real key signing by DAZN when they announced, their intention to jump into boxing. So, there's been reports that Wilder is going to sit down with John Skipper of DAZN and talk about a potential deal. I don't really foresee that happening. I think that Wilder's really just upping his leverage for whatever his next fight will be, which by all accounts is likely to be a mandatory defense against Dominic Brazil. He's going to make 8 figures for what could end up being a one-round knockout. And then potentially I could see him then after that making a deal with either DAZN or ESPN for a single fight against either Fury or Joshua, but I don't foresee him making a multi-fight deal with either of those. I think his loyalty is to Al Heyman for helping build his career, and I don't really see him leaving that stable anytime soon as far as a long-term deal elsewhere.
Yeah, now, the heavyweight division, obviously, when boxing at its best, it's usually because the heavyweight division is booming. And with Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, those are pretty much the three top dogs. But the thing is, for the sport to really get people going, those guys got to fight each other. And now with Fury signed a top rank in ESPN, the immediate rematch for Wilder is obviously out of the picture, and then the dream match of a heavyweight unification bout for all the belts between Wilder and Joshua, that's on hold. And instead, Joshua is going to defend all his belts in the U.S. for his American debut at Madison Square Garden against Big Baby Miller. Now that leaves Wilder pretty much on the sidelines, and he's presumably going to defend his WBC belt against Brazil, as you mentioned. So it makes me ask the question, what are your thoughts on the current state of the heavyweight division? And what is the fight that you think everyone is clamoring for?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think Wilder and Joshua are considered the two names in the division that everyone wants to see fight. But I think the unfinished business aspect of the first Wilder-Fury fight makes that rematch more immediately enticing, considering Fury basically out of 3-year retirement and then a couple tune-up fights, giving Wilder all he could handle and outboxing him for the first 7 rounds of that fight, and then getting off the canvas twice, including like a 12th-round knockdown that I don't think any of us expected him to get up from. I think Wilder and Fury like each other, and that's the big differing factor between that situation and Wilder and Joshua, where bad blood between Wilder and his team and Joshua and his side is to the point where until the other unfinished business is taken care of, I really doubt we see that fight. I could be wrong, but I really doubt we see that fight in the next 1 or 2 fights for either guy. I think Joshua fighting Big Baby Miller in New York will go a long ways to establishing kind of what that fight is worth, depending on how that fight draws and how that does streaming numbers. That's a good first step to making that a reality, but I still think both of these guys see at least 2 more fights before we see Wilder and Joshua face each other.
Yeah, now, word is out there now that ESPN and DAZN are both trying to get their hands on Wilder to obviously facilitate the matchmaking process for a potential Wilder-Joshua fight on DAZN, and then that Wilder-Fury fight, the rematch, on ESPN. Now, in the meantime, neither of those fights are happening. It'll be Wilder versus Brazil, presumably on either Showtime or Fox. And I wouldn't quite call Wilder and Brazil a pay-per-view fight. Most fans would agree with me. Now, that Wilder's already been on pay-per-view with Showtime is definitely something you got to consider. So do you think there's going to be pressure from the network to make Wilder and Brazil a pay-per-view card?
The matchup itself is not a pay-per-view quality fight. The only reason this would be on pay-per-view is that Wilder has now used his leverage to up his earning ability to the point that it's reported out there that he could earn $12.5 million for that fight against Brazil, which neither Showtime or Fox have that in their budget. Both of those networks their deals with the PBC are between 40 and 60 million per year. And, paying Deontay Wilder $12.5 million of that total would put too big of a dent in what they're able to pay, for all the other fights that they put on their network within a calendar year. So I think it's highly likely that it ends up on pay-per-view and doesn't do very well. I would be shocked if that fight sold more than 100,000 pay-per-views. I just don't think people really are that aware of Dominic Brazil to the point that they would think he has a reasonable chance. And I don't think that Deontay Wilder's name is of the level of, like a Mike Tyson, where people ordered Tyson fights even when they knew he was going to obliterate the guy that he was facing. I just don't think Deontay Wilder or the heavyweight championship is worth as much as it was, 2 decades ago.
Yeah, no, definitely not. I mean, obviously, we don't have a Mike Tyson type of guy. It could change, though. But in the meantime, probably the biggest fight of the year happening this Saturday on Fox pay-per-view. Not a heavyweight fight, but you got Mikey Garcia looking to cement his mark in boxing history against IBF welterweight champion Errol Spence Jr. And now Garcia moving up 2 weight classes to challenge a welterweight champion that pretty much no one else in the 147-pound division wants a piece of. And because of that, a lot of people think that Mikey is crazy. What do you feel about Garcia's decision to call out a vicious southpaw like Errol Spence Jr. while trying to become just the 6th fighter in boxing history to become a 5-division world champion?
Since pretty early on, since this fight was announced, I actually have leaned Mikey Garcia and stuck with that as my prediction. I just think that Mikey Garcia is the best technical fighter in boxing right now with Floyd Mayweather retired. You know, he doesn't look like the typical top-level boxer. You know, he's not body beautiful. He kind of has that Julio Cesar Chavez build where you look at this guy and you think he's not an athlete, but the way that he fights, the way he uses distance, the way that he sets up his punches, the way that he keeps himself out of harm's distance, it would have been hard for Errol Spence to find guys in his training camp to imitate and mimic the things that Mikey Garcia is able to do. And I think that's the kind of thing that Mikey Garcia will have an edge when they get in the ring. I think the early part of the fight really will fall towards Mikey, and it'll be a matter of if Errol's size is just too much. And, you know, that's not to negate the fact that Errol himself is one of the better boxers, you know, out there. He's got great skills. He has amazing power. You know, he's never lost to a fighter shorter than him. No fighter that is Mikey Garcia's height or less has made it the distance against Errol Spence. So there's a lot of things that are working against Mikey historically. I like that he's daring to be great. I've really liked the way that he's talked about this fight and how confident he sounded. You know, he just sounds like he is on the sort of path that these other guys that have dared to be great and jumped up 2 weight classes, you know, have done before. And, you know, Mikey Garcia did win a belt at 140 pounds, which is 1 weight class below. So, you know, it's not like he's entering territory that's super foreign to him. You know, obviously the jump from 140 to 147 is one of the bigger ones in boxing, and especially facing the biggest welterweight out there is, you know, not what anyone would have expected him to do for his first fight at the weight. But I'm leaning towards Mikey. I wouldn't be shocked if the size ends up being too much, but I just think Mikey is so technically gifted. It'll be easier for him to prepare for Errol than the other way around.
Yeah, I got nothing but respect for Mikey Garcia and his quest to be great. I mean, he's challenging Errol Spence Jr. in his own division, which that deserves a tip of the cap at the very least. But for me and many other fight fans, the fight I want to see, and most people want to see at welterweight, is a unification fight between Spence and Terrence Crawford, who most will agree are the 2 best welterweights in the world. Crawford, obviously, with Top Rank and ESPN, which unfortunately these days qualifies as an excuse for the two never to fight. But could an Errol Spence Jr. victory against Garcia change that at all? I mean, could we get any closer to seeing a potential dream match between Spence and Crawford, or do we just have to wait a while before a fight like that ever happens?
Honestly, I don't think Errol Spence Crawford is the fight that we see if we do see a cross promotion between the PBC and Top Rank. I think it's more likely someone like Keith Thurman goes across the street for a fight against Terrence Crawford. You know, I spent a lot of time with Thurman last week. You know, he was working the Fox broadcasts for the border fight, you know, in the week leading up to it. And the way he talks about it is, you know, he only sees himself in the sport for another 4 years maybe. And he's just out there to make the most money that he can. And if Top Rank comes with the kind of offers that, you know, they've made to bring other guys over to their side of the street, you know, if they offered Keith Thurman a purse that's much larger than anything that he's seen before, it would not shock me if he decided to be the guy to take on Crawford. Errol Spence, I don't think is the guy. You know, Errol Spence, anytime he's been asked about Crawford, has said Crawford's on the wrong side of the street and won't even really address a possible fight. I think Errol Spence is not going to be a welterweight that much longer after this fight. I think he might even skip 154 pounds and go straight to middleweight, which is a place where he could have a massive fight with Jamal Charlo or even Jared Hurd once, you know, he moves up to 160 pounds at some point. I just don't see Spence at welterweight for maybe another year and then moves up, and I don't think that a fight between him and Crawford ever comes off, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is unfortunate that a fight like that probably might not even happen, but in the meantime, we do have 2 great fighters duking it out on Saturday, and I can't even imagine what it's going to be like in Arlington. I'll be watching the fight here in California, but are you going to be down there for the fight?
I've been working for Fox since this PBC deal as their main research person for their studio shows, and you know, I write for Sporting News as well, but I'll be out there kind of doing both of those roles. I'll be writing stories for Sporting News and then also working some of these events for Fox. This is the first Fox pay-per-view that they've ever done for boxing, so it'll be really interesting to see how that works. And whether or not these two guys that are both pretty quiet dudes can really sell a pay-per-view.
Yeah, no, I honestly think that it will be bought by a lot of people. Obviously, Mikey Garcia is Hispanic. A lot of Hispanic viewers tend to buy pay-per-view. I think he'll do just fine. And Errol Spence Jr. gaining popularity too. I think those guys will be just fine. And I'm just incredibly jealous of the fact that you're going to be down there. Just wanted to say that. But I'll be ordering the fight and watching with my friends in the comfort of my home. And I'm excited to see two of the sport's best go at it. But anyway, he's Mark Ortega. He writes for Sporting News and now is an insider and researcher with PBC on Fox. So, Mark, thanks again for coming on the show, and I hope you have a great time down there in Texas.
Yeah, you too. Enjoy the fight on Saturday.
Thanks, Mark.